Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Kitabi Qisse. Now, for those who speak Hindustani, Kitabi Qisse means bookish tales, and I am happy to bring it back. This is a series we started to spotlight South Asian creatives, whether it's writers, illustrators, curators, all kinds of people who are making our world brighter and better with lots of creative inputs. And I am very excited that we have here with us the founder of Toka Box, Preethi. And before I get further, I'm going to ask you, Preethi, to give us a quick intro and tell us what you do.
Hi everyone, I'm Preethi Chandrasekhar. I am the founder of Toka Box, which is right now it is a curated online bookstore for South Asian children's literature. And we've been doing this for close to 10 years.
That's incredible. 10 years is a long
Oh,
time. So I feel like 10 years ago, I was not even in the United States. But yeah, I mean, I was in Germany, which has like zero, or at least at that time, didn't have any online or in person literature, which was South Asian. And I think it's a journey that even in the United States, despite having like a big South Asian population, it still is a challenge when I go to a bookstore or to a library or to schools. So tell me, how did you begin? Like, what's the story? How did you suddenly decide I'm going to become this curator, bookstore? What was I guess, the push for it?
right. So we've been around in many avatars, I would say. So initially, actually, I started like as a new mother here in the US. We started like a parenting blog because at that time this was like I feel like we were the first generation of parents like looking to the internet for answers for parenting. So we started with that, and then as my daughter grew older, of course, reading books is a thing that is part of the culture here in the US, right? You read to your children bedtime stories and things like that, and then that's when I realized the disconnect that oh, I have all these books, but no books that are representative of my daughter. So as we started looking out for more books, we started posting reviews on the parenting blog, and from there I realized that there are books out there, but accessibility is a problem. Knowing they exist is a problem. Um, and so a solution to that was building a curated box called Toka Box. It was actually called the IMC's Treasure Box for a while, and then we rebranded it to Toka Box. So as we were curating these books out for subscription, we said, okay, why instead of just a book, we would throw in a little activity which will be STEM and reading based that will get kids interested and involved because that's one of the things that if I'm in the local libraries, I take my daughter to a story time. They'll read a couple of books, they do a little activity. It's a fun Sunday morning, right? So we wanted that same experience in a box, and we started that with Toka Box. And now, the landscape has changed. Like I said, it's 10 years. At that time, we didn't know the existence of books. Things were a few publishers, amazing publishers that were there then are still there, like Tulika publishing books from India. But now the landscape has changed so much more. And I feel like even traditional publishing is starting to wake up to the fact that they need more diversity in their offerings. So we have now slowly shifted to offering a platform for South Asian children's literature, publishers, authors, illustrators from all over, offering curated books because a lot of these books are now being independently published. So we want to be able to curate them well for our audience as well as provide a platform to publishers who are publishing, who are small publishers who are finding the distribution aspect of it complex. But we are one of their places where they can have a direct reach into the South Asian community, the whatever community that we have built. They have a ready-made community to plug into to publicize their books. And
That's very interesting. It's very interesting for several reasons. I think one, I think people understand the concept of a subscription box because I guess, from our Amazon and Netflixes, we sort of get that experience. And there are quite a few subscription boxes for books that I'm at least aware of, but it took me a while and like a jump into this space to understand there is something also for South Asians where I discovered your work. So it's kind of like I think discoverability is a true problem. So I feel that, especially for small, independently published books, it's very important for them to get in front of the community. And I'm happy that you're doing that work and getting across and connecting those two pieces between, the creator and the consumer, which is our audience. And there are parents obviously who are in your community, and I was very intrigued that you started with this blog that you spoke about. So I guess this next question is not going to be out of the blogging space, so to say, because lots of people will research on how to sort of be better parents, or how to parent kids when they are having these two worlds that they are managing, one being having a different heritage culture, especially here, and then also trying to fit in and belong to their schools, or their regular worldly day-to-day experiences. So tell us something that as a parent and as someone who works in the space, what are some of the tips that you provide parents who are trying to sort of grow the sense of belonging in their children, and find that balance between these two worlds?
Yeah. So belonging has always been like a thought that I've had from the beginning, right? And I feel like we cannot belong to the world until we belong to ourselves. So in a way, we need to belong, our children need to belong to themselves, belong to all parts of themselves. So for from that perspective, for me, obviously I'm a bookseller and a book curator. So I'm always approaching it from a book perspective. And even in that book perspective, I feel like we say cultural learning needs to belonging, but then that's too wide for me in that sense that culture is always changing and it is different for different people, and you're all on a spectrum, right? And cultures and value systems intersect. Your value system may be different from somebody who belongs to the same culture, but you hold a different value system. So there is all that, complex web of things. And I feel like with books, you are a one-on-one connection with your child. You are able to share your thoughts and your values and your culture on a one-on-one basis with your child, increasing their not only their connection with you, but also their connection to their heritage and culture and sense of belonging. And just the fact that they could read a book that mirrors them just places them in a spot in the world. Like, I belong in this world, and this is kind of where I am among everything else. So that for me was a very important aspect of doing what I do. And this is my biggest tip, if you
Yeah.
say, of having, talking about belonging is rather than approaching it in this wide way of cultural learning and all that is there, it's all part of that. But to start from that little kernel of connection with your own self is is a great way to then you have your roots
Yeah.
deep into
Yeah.
just.
I love that. I love that, starting from the place of connection, because I think sometimes, like, what is the purpose of living, or what is the purpose of cultural knowledge transfer? It is to build that connection, right? That is it's a true a value that we have, like, in the past, sort of not given enough importance to. If you grow up in the same culture where you're getting or absorbing things more naturally, because that's your one culture that you're a part of. But even in India, I think when I go there and parents are wanting to build that connection, right? I mean, irrespective of whether it is cultural education or just general, their sense of being, or wanting to feel that, this is who I am, and I belong here and I want to fit in. Those are conversations you'll have irrespective of any other cultural layer. So it's very much strips down the value of what we are trying to do as a parent. And I love that idea of connecting through books. And I hadn't thought about this, like, you do truly have a one-on-one connection when you connect on, like, when you see something. And I definitely have books with my son that I read, that feel that we have this special thing that we do when we read a specific book. And yeah, so it truly does build connection, and I hope more parents sort of explore that if they don't already.
Yeah.
And as a bookseller, as a curator, you've obviously, like, now you've had this organization for a whole decade, and you've probably gone through the let's do this now and let's do this next, and then changed it, and then you've had feedback, and then you've gone back to the drawing board, because that's how small businesses work, right? So, have you received feedback from the community where you're like, okay, we are doing exactly what we wanted, and that gave you that motivation to move forward? Like, share with us, like, what has the community response been, and what's kept you going?
Yeah. So when you asked me this question, one of the biggest things that came into my mind was one parent, like who's a subscriber to Toka Box. They were getting all these representation books, right? Like it was there, but then one day they opened the box and they found um, uh, exactly a character that mirrored her son, and she immediately wrote back to me. It's like it was an unexpected incidental representation, which is a word I just learned a couple of days
Mm.
ago, even though I've been in the space for 10 years, like incidental representation, right? It's just a story of a little boy who's just lying on the grass and looking at clouds and looking at the shapes. So there was no cultural running, there was no value, there's no moral, there's nothing. It's just a story of a boy and his friend spending the afternoon looking at clouds in the sky and looking at shapes. So that little feeling like, oh, I opened the book and there it is, my son in that book, and for them to form that connection, that's really what we want. That moment, that places that child in a sense of belonging. Look at that, I'm in this book, and for me, that is one of the biggest feedbacks that I have received. That I felt like, okay, I'm doing something connecting. It's useful.
Yeah.
That's
It's beautiful. That's such a great example, because I think it also speaks to what you were saying earlier with me, that I think we have to move away from the fact that the only story that is South Asian is something to do with immigrant culture or something to do with like specific parts of culture. But I think the day-to-day lives of children, the way they see the world with wonder, whether they are looking at clouds or leaves or seasons, like who knows, whatever, that itself bears telling. And especially when the character, they could be a character called Ram, but they are having a regular school day, and that itself is a story. We don't need to bring in immigration and like religion and like 100 other things to it to layer it,
identity
because
crisis. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it doesn't always need to be that, because we also
Yeah.
have regular days. Like, I took my
Yeah.
lunch to school and here is what happened in the cafeteria. That
Yeah.
itself could be
Yeah.
something to speak of. So
Yes.
it's the next level, which I hope that our publishers and writers sort of wake up to, that it doesn't always need to be complex, and you don't need a mango to make it an Indian story. You could like okay. And so, now that you've done this work for so long, I'm always like looking at business leaders like you, and I'm kind of like as a reader, but also as someone who's curious, what's coming up next? What are some of the new projects that you're hoping to do with Toka Box, and what should we expect?
So for now, we are focused more on, giving, like I said, the platform to more and more publishers that are coming out there to be able to reach out and, give them that platform to reach the consumer. We want to get into more libraries, make sure that we have a broader representation in libraries, because I feel somehow traditional publishing is still kind of falling short on that incidental representation that we were talking about. There are books coming out there, but also because traditional publishing has been this behemoth for so long, just getting through that and getting through all the gatekeepers to finally publish books that are more broader is hard. So making finding inroads into libraries, finding inroads into schools, not only on cultural language learning, even though we have language learning books, but also to um, kind of improve accessibility for these kind of books across the board. So we're working towards that. That's our goal. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Continue to do what we're doing, try to get better at what we're doing, make it easier, make it flow well, find a big, keep going, growing our audience. That's really what it is.
Yeah, yeah. No, I like that, because I think there's sometimes schools can appear like fortresses, that they'll always go through what they have gone through, and it takes a while before you can see that change or openness for new things. And for libraries, I just think they are open more or less, but it's also still a big process to get into a library. So I think it just requires work. That's at least how I see it. It's not
Yes.
easy. It's just like a lot of follow-ups before you actually get into a system.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
now that you work with so many different publishers and indie publishers and new authors and old authors, what are some projects that you're very excited about? Because I know you have access to so much information that's coming from the community. So I'm curious to see, is there like work that you've seen recently or something that's coming up that you're excited about that you'd like to share?
I think there is like a big focus right now on language learning, that but there are a lot of bilingual books being published across the board. So right now at Toka Box, we are largely a lot of Hindi and Tamil books. We want to expand that to other languages as well, because as I was thinking a few days ago, language is one of our portals to our heritage, right? Losing that, we lose a lot when I mean, I lost my mother language as we were, migrated out of our home state into a different state. So, as such, learning that language kind of forms that connection that nothing else can in a very, very quick way. So, for me, finding language learning books that are easily accessible, that keep children interested, are contemporary, are of this world right now. I think that's why we are more focused on hoping we can find more around that space.
Yeah, I think I work a lot in that area simply because I belong to an area where the language would literally be dying, is what I would call it, because I mean I belong to Kashmir, and we moved out of the valley in 90 due to terrorism, and a lot of people who are under 40 are not able to speak the language because they migrated. And I don't know if language learning was number one when people were in survival mode.
Yeah,
So, that loss I've seen very closely what happens, because there are some things you can't even explain unless you don't have the words to describe something, unless you have some kind of a language to share that. And I think the world began with like 10,000. There used to be 10,000 languages. We are at like 6,000 now, and increasingly we lose languages as we become more and more homogeneous in the way we communicate across the world. So that, uh, preserving what the knowledge within a language, or the cultural elements within a language, is really key to how we sort of sustain what we have learned from generations, because there's no other way I can describe what my grandmother said to my son,
yeah.
unless I use a vessel, which is the language. And so I really appreciate the work that hopefully you're able to do in that. And the other thing that you said, which I literally like would love to have as well, is putting those languages in places that are from today, like contemporizing what they share. Because I was speaking to a parent yesterday, it was very interesting. They said, they had a Hindi book and it said "Ga se ganna," and the child hasn't seen a sugar cane. Like they live in Canada, there's no like sugar cane that grows there, and so they just wouldn't like grasp it because it was not something that they could sort of understand from where they were, and it did not contextualize enough.
Yeah.
So it is something that we have to think about, that how what are the children experiencing before we share with them things that might be 20 years old or maybe not in the setting that they are in.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the work of people who are making it
Mm.
what children will respond to.
No, there are a lot. I think there are publishers who are kind of out there who realize that we have to make the quality of the book kind of match up to the quality of the books available in other languages. We need to contemporize the stories so that we can appeal to the children. They need to be able to pick up that book because they want to, rather than because they're told in their language class that you have to read this particular book, right? So I think that is the way to keep language alive. And like you said, like a lot of times our parents or our previous generation did not prioritize language learning because they were too busy trying to come to that place and survive. And so for me personally, I feel my parents did not emphasize my mother language. Even though I spoke it, I don't know how to read and write it.
Mhm.
And now my mother wants to teach my daughter how to read and write the language, but then there is a generation skipped, and now we have to find ways to make this language accessible. So Tamil has an additional challenge of dialect issues and things like
Hmm.
that, where the books have a different dialect from what we speak at home. And even though my daughter has a passive understanding of what we speak, reading becomes a challenge because the language and the words that are used in the books are a lot more uh, like Shuddha Hindi versus spoken Hindi,
Yeah.
something like that. There is a dialect difference there, and
Yeah.
our mother language is of a completely different dialect. So there are all these language complexity and challenges, but I think that publishers are addressing that, and I see like people are approaching it from so many different fun ways to solve the same problem that they hit upon, which is really, really fun to see. And I can only imagine that in the next 5 years, it's going to be an amazing space for
I
sure.
hope so. I mean, it's kind of funny that you're saying script because we have a language where the script went extinct. So I am working on how do you actually share this language, which I and two generations above me have learned only orally. So it's so interesting to have so many different nuances and contexts depending on which language you're talking about. And
Yeah.
for us, for example, I'm like, and a lot of bilingual writers actually, I have one book that just I was reading recently. They will use even for Hindi, for example, they might not use Devanagari because kids may not read that, but they will write it in like English alphabet so that you can phonetically read it. And I've done that with Kashmiri, at least the dialect I speak, where I would write it in Devanagari as well as like in English, so that people can phonetically speak it. And so yeah, I guess people are finding all creative ways in order to like pass on.
We have so many books in Hindi that are actually phonetically written right now in Toka Box. There are publishers who have done that. And there's always that argument between the purists and the ones who are like, we are making it work versus the language purists. This is not really the way it should be. But I feel like it is, again, that spectrum, right? You've got to have something on this end and something on that end to preserve the whole language. And you need all kinds of people trying all kinds of things, including audio. There is audio availability. There is so it really depends on what aspect of that language a particular publisher is um, kind of targeting, you could say. Like, are they targeting language schools? Then they would build their book in a different way. Versus, are they targeting second and third generation Americans who have lost their language and now they just want your child to know a smattering of their mother language in some way, and some way to connect when you're doing the bedtime story. You're not just reading it in English, you're also being able to read something in your own mother language, right? So there's a whole spectrum of work there, and there is space for so much more. And like you said, we have so many languages, and we're losing out. So we want to be there to say, if you make the book, we are here. We're with a ready-made audience. We'll solve your marketing problem in a small way for you, maybe not largely, but in a small way in the space that we are in, because that's one of the other biggest challenges. Our market is so scattered. Where do you go to sell this book is a question once you've written the book.
Yeah.
We want to
Yeah.
be able to solve that for the creators. Um, while we may not be writing the book ourselves, we are here to help.
Yeah, no, that is so important, and it's a part of that value chain that people. You can't solve every problem by yourself, right? So you have to attack part of the problem, and then hopefully have collaborations on the others. And I think every part is equally important, and everyone has their own unique speciality that they bring in to solve it. And for me, like no matter what end of the spectrum people are on, or maybe they are in the center, wherever they are, I think as long as we are working and moving forward, I intently feel that the future is brighter because the world loses like two languages every 2 weeks. So even if we are able to like preserve it, even if they are not able to read the script but they know like 20 different words in that language, I think that adds. And learning is additive, and I think that a child will get something in their brain, which I think is important because bilingual or multilingual brains just are wired different. So, and there's research to show that kids who speak multiple languages are creative thinkers. They improve their cognitive empathy as well as like critical thinking. So hopefully more parents take on the challenge. However they want to solve it is of course up to them, but the something will add on, like small things become big things. So hopefully that is the future that we are building together. So thanks so much,
You
Preeti. I
personally.
appreciate it.
Thank you for doing this with us. We really